If everything works, it means you are absolutely not trying hard enough. There's a really big difference between cultivating experimentation and creating chaos. And when I mean an entrepreneurial mindset, I mean doing everything and anything to make your business successful, having a true ownership mentality. What you have to do over time is ignore the users and really focus on the money. If no one's willing to pay you, then you have no ICP. Data is the most excruciating thing, and it's the least sexy thing, but it's the most important thing.
Making sure that you have a unified, shared, collective source of truth is so critical.
The world is changing so insanely fast that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a marketer, an engineer, a salesperson, you have to change with that.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Before we get into today's episode, there is no doubt that it is a very weird hiring landscape out there right now. And the ability to support recruiting top go-to-market talent has always been a huge value add at GTM Fund. This year alone, we've made over 300 candidate introductions. And overall, we've made over 2,000 candidate introductions and placed hundreds of top talent at companies. At first, this really started just for our portfolio, but our network has extended beyond it to the overall software ecosystem. But the very best talent is difficult to find and even harder to hire because they're the best at what they do, making great money and succeeding exactly where they are. And they're not actively looking or reaching out about maybe your role, especially in the current market. A players are way more hesitant to make a move. Behind the scenes, though, our partners at Pursuit help us to equip sales and marketing teams with top talent. We work very hand in hand with them to be able to provide the top go-to-market talent for companies on a non-retainer basis. In my eyes, they are best in breed and a huge part of our talent program at GTM Fund. So if you are hiring for sales and marketing roles, you can reach out directly to Pursuit for access to their recruiting process at www.pursuitsalessolutions.com/GTM, or just send myself or anyone else on the GTM Fund a note and we can help make it happen. Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the GTM podcast. As always, it's your host, Scott Barker, and we really appreciate you lending us your eardrums for the next 45 minutes or an hour or so. We have a fantastic guest lined up. I am joined by Jessica Gilmartin. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Excited to have you. And there's a lot I want to get through. But really quickly, just for the listeners, a quick bio. So Jessica has nearly 20 years of go-to-market leadership experience, most recently as the CRO and CMO simultaneously at Calendly. We all probably use Calendly in our day-to-day lives. And then previous to that, she was the head of revenue marketing at Asana, so two incredible companies. And then the CMO of Honor as well, which is one of the largest privately owned home care companies in the US. And I thought this was cool. Prior to you getting into tech, you co-founded a yogurt franchise. How did you get inspired to do that?
As everyone does, it's a very obvious thing to start a yogurt business. So I moved out to the Bay Area after business school and a stint for a couple of years at Dell. And I reached out to a good friend of mine who I had gone to Wharton with, and she said that she was planning to start a business, asked me if I wanted to. I was really dumb and naive and said, sure. And so we were brainstorming things that we loved, and we both love healthy food. We're both really passionate about it. And so we just kind of came up with this idea of a super healthy, super delicious frozen yogurt concept. And it was very, very successful. We were fortunate. And then we expanded it across the Bay Area. And after a couple of years, I sold it and then ended up kind of finding my way and stumbling my way into technology.
Super cool. Super cool. Is there any, I'm sure there's many, but what are some of the standout lessons that you took from the yogurt business into your career in technology?
So many. And I think The biggest thing for me is I think of myself as an entrepreneur. So no matter how big the business I am working in is, no matter what position I have, I really take that entrepreneurial mindset with me. And I expect everyone that works for me and that works with me to have that. And when I mean an entrepreneurial mindset, I mean doing everything and anything to make your business successful, having a true ownership mentality. And I think that's actually one of the things that has made me as successful as I've been, is this idea that I don't have a job. My job is to make the company successful. And so whenever I'm asked to take something on, whatever I see that there's a hole, when I see there's a challenge, I just jump into it. I don't wait to be told. I don't say that that's not my job. I see so many people just being really passive, or saying like, hey, that's somebody else's role. Like, that's just not what I believe. And that's certainly not the culture that I build on my team. So it's just that like true ownership mentality, I think, is so important to being successful, regardless of the company size.
Yeah, I love that. And it's certainly a red thread we see with all our kind of like top performing guests is this idea of, regardless of your role, you are there for one reason only, to make the company and your customers successful. And, it takes wearing many different hats on many different days. But I love that. So let's get right into it. I think kind of one of the core things I wanted to chat with you about is, you've been part of these two incredible unicorn companies in Asana and Calendly. I think my understanding is there was a pretty strong PLG motion out of the gate for both of those companies. And then along the way, you kind of have to grow up a little bit and start using more, sales-led growth tactics. And maybe starting with your time at Asana, um, why make that shift? And when should companies start thinking about making that shift?
So I'm a marketer. And so I will talk about the customer ad nauseum. So you'll probably hear me talk about that in every single one of my responses, because I really think it's so important. And why it's so important is that you can't just decide to be a PLG business or an SLG business or an SMB business or an enterprise business. Your go-to-market motion has to be driven by the product. It has to be driven by what the product can do and the value that the product drives for the customer. And so we saw the same things and same signals at Asana and at Calendly, which is that we had very strong PLG motions. And the reason we had very strong PLG motions was that the product is incredibly intuitive and delightful. It's a delightful individual user experience. Someone can get value out of it from day one, which in my opinion is one of the most important things. It's the most important thing for a PLG business. But then we saw that people wanted to share it and that there was exponential value in having more people within an organization use it. And so once that happens, once you have an amazing PLG product that all of a sudden can be even better and provide even more value when 10 users have it, when 50 users have it, when 100 users have it, and when they're reaching out to you, your customers, and saying, hey, we would love all these additional features. We would love to have an enterprise agreement. We would love to have a Teams agreement. We need extra security features. We need. Then all of a sudden that becomes a great catalyst to say, okay, do we actually want to go up market? Do we want to have an SLG motion? Because that completely changes your company. And so then you have to make that very conscious decision of, okay, are we going to move up market? Are we going to become a all SLG company or a hybrid, or are we going to stick to our PLG roots?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is almost like you don't decide to make the shift. Your customers and where your product is at is going to naturally kind of pull you along in a direction. Was there any time, whether it was Asana or Calendly, where you had some of this sort of like enterprise demand? They wanted Teams, they wanted this functionality, but the PLG is still working so well that you're like, oh, maybe we don't want to divert too many resources. Like, is there a tipping point, I guess?
It's really hard and there's no right answer. And we absolutely face that at both Calendly and Asana constantly. Most of the decisions that we had to make, most of the discussions we had were around resource allocation. I'd say that that's absolutely the hardest part of having a hybrid motion, is that everything becomes split. I always say that it's like having two companies, because a enterprise, if you work in marketing, you know that an enterprise marketing motion is wildly different than a PLG marketing motion. So you have to have two marketing teams who have very different skill sets, and you're almost having to compete with each other for resources. You also are competing with each other over your website space, because what is the thing that you are going to ask people to do? Are you going to ask them to sign up for a demo? You're going to ask them to talk to a salesperson? You're going to ask them to sign up for free? And so having to make those really hard decisions around, with your very precious real estate, what's the call to action? That's just marketing. And then when you think about product and engineering, talk about scarce resources and prioritization. So building an enterprise product, building SSO and SCIM and data analytics and permissions, those are wildly different than building a super usable, intuitive product with all the little features that an individual would want. And so we constantly had to decide, like, what is the right allocation of resources? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40, 80-20, 90-10? And those changed constantly. And then, of course, you've got a sales team that is, wants to close six-figure deals, and they're often predicated on promising a feature set to specific customers. And then you have to decide as a culture, are you going to have engineering teams and product teams that are devoted to bespoke requests for enterprise customers, which, if you are an enterprise company, is a no-brainer. If you're a PLG company that also does enterprise, then that further creates like more prioritization, more issues. So it's very difficult, much more difficult than one would think from the outside, being like, well, it can't be that hard. But it is. There's so many other issues like data warehousing, operations, legal, finance. There's like just so many cans of worms that get opened up as you start to think about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. You said it's almost like building two companies. So you're going to go hire marketers, salespeople that have these two different skill sets. And, I imagine in its good form, there's like healthy competition between those two companies internally. But I imagine it also leads to some friction and alignment issues. Did you battle that at all?
All the time, literally all the time. And I think, I learned so much at Asana. I was able to take that to Calendly right away. So it took me probably 2 years at Asana to figure out, how do we start to bridge the gap? And as I said, I will go back to the customer. What I ultimately realized was that we had to think about the customer first and think about the customer journey, because there typically is no SLG without PLG. And I think that's where people often get a little bit lost and they don't see the forest for the trees. So in almost, I'm not going to say everyone, but almost every hybrid company, people find out about the product through some kind of self-serve experience. And so people are interested in getting a 1,000-person license because they have had some experience with the individual product. And you can't shortcut that. As much as we want to, you can't. If you have an incredible, like the perfect title at the perfect company, what we often tried to do at first was to force them to talk to a salesperson, even if they wanted to sign up for the product. You can't do that. And so really what I brought to Calendly right away was this idea that you have to follow what the customer wants. And so if the customer, no matter how amazing that customer title is, no matter what your data enrichment tells you, if the customer wants to sign up for the product and not talk to a salesperson, let them do that. And so we really just focused on trying to make the buying and evaluation process as easy and customer driven as possible. And then look for all the opportunities to segment the customer afterwards and encourage them to upsell, encourage them to expand, encourage them to talk to a salesperson, but you can't shortcut it. So really just validating and honoring what the customer wants just totally makes life so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk me through a little bit about like the how and some of the tactical execution. So let's say, a great brand, Coca-Cola, you can see that they've come and they have 30 people across the organization who are, using Calendly. what kind of data would you look for to then be like, okay, now it's time to flip our resources to the SLG motion and let's get a strategic AE on this one, and like let's go and kind of do some maybe even outbound into that account and the various stakeholders. Walk me through some of that.
Yeah, there's really we tried so many things, and and people talk a lot about PQLs, and most people do it very wrong. And so I would say that there's two things that we did that worked reasonably well. So number one is looking at and PQLs is a reason called product because they have to be driven by the product. Everything has to be driven by the product. And so one thing that we did quite well at Calendly is we looked at what product signals tended to indicate that somebody was ready to talk to sales. So we kind of did like a reverse engineering and looked and said, okay, when somebody contacted sales, what were typically the things that they did beforehand that led them to be interested? And so, for example, at Calendly, what we saw was oftentimes when people did a certain type of integration, that was kind of a signal that they were interested in expansion. And so then we started to build in a true PQL process, which is whenever we saw someone with the right title at the right company who did one of a few different product integrations, we would then send them a personalized email. It wouldn't actually be from a salesperson, but it would seem very customized and very personalized from a salesperson, and ask them if they would be interested in talking to a salesperson because we could help them specifically with that integration and with other things related to it. So we gave them something valuable. We didn't just say, hey, talk to us. Want to talk to us now? Like we gave them a reason to want to talk to a salesperson because we would provide value. And of course, we'd have a Calendly link right there so they could sign up, to talk to a salesperson right away. That was very successful. The other thing that we did was we looked at companies that had a lot of individual users signing up. And that is by far the best source for large enterprise customers is when you have, as you said, 30, 50, 100 small teams like licenses, individual users, whether they're paid or not, but there's some clear indication that that company has a real need. And then our sales team would have that information, we would provide it in a data pull. They would reach out to the IT person, to a senior person and say, hey, did you know that there's 200 people at your company using Calendly, using Asana? This is how we can help you. We can reduce your costs. We can increase your security. Would you be interested in a call? At the same time, from a marketing perspective, we would surround the decision makers with marketing through ABM to really kind of create a groundswell. And that was quite successful as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did you think about defining your ICP? So I think at like Asana, there's a more defined like persona. I think Calendly is one of those blessings and a curse where you can sell into all different parts of the organization. Really, like everyone has meetings, everyone needs to schedule their day and their life. How did you refine your personas, your ICP, when like you can kind of be everything to everyone, which again can be hard when you think of marketing?
Yes, that is such the greatest part and the Achilles heel of a PLG business is your customer is everybody, and that is not helpful when you're a marketer and a salesperson. And so I think really the two ways that we looked at it, both at Asana and at Calendly, was industry, which is incredibly important, particularly in a PLG-SLG hybrid business. Like industry is very, very important in terms of how you can segment, as well, usually as company size and type of work. And so, and function. And so really what we looked at was not users, but we looked at customers that purchased, that expanded and retained. And so we just did this very, very thorough analysis of who are the customers from a function perspective, a company size perspective, and an industry perspective that were, the best long-term customers, had the highest LTV, had the highest NRR. And one of the things we also was actually quite interesting in Calendly was we also saw that there was technology that drove that too. So, for example, certain Microsoft users were much more likely to integrate Calendly with Microsoft for a variety of reasons. And so whenever we had a certain kind of Microsoft CRM, we knew that that was an incredible sale for us. We also knew like finance was an incredible sale for us, education. So we just saw historically the sales that were easier to close, had the highest ACVs, had the higher expansion and retention. And so I think that that's really what you have to do over time is ignore the users and really focus on the money, the dollars.
Yeah, that makes sense. So less obsessed with the user or the title of that person and more like, okay, is this a style of company in the industry that we know we can drive incredible results for? It's kind of like zooming out a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I've seen a lot of companies really focus on users for their ICP, but that's not that helpful because especially in a PLG business, you typically have a free trial or you have a free component. And it's great that people are using you. Hopefully they're spreading it. Hopefully that gives you some value. But if they're not paying you, they are not your ICP. So you really have to focus on those customers that are paying you. That's your ICP. And if no one's willing to pay you, then you have no ICP. And you got to think of something else.
Well said. Well said. I like it. What would you do differently? Let's say if I could fly you back to your first day at Calendly, what are some of the lessons now looking back that you're like, I wish I could redo that, or we would have sped up X if we just knew these one or two things?
I think I learned so many lessons at Asana. I actually feel like I did things pretty well at Calendly. Where it took me way too long at Asana was that merging of the PLG and the SLG. Because I had really come from enterprise marketing. And so I just kind of kept the enterprise marketing very separate from the PLG marketing. And we had a whole growth team. They were doing their own thing. My team was doing our own thing. And it just took way too long for us to realize that it was not about an enterprise customer versus a PLG customer. It was about a customer. And it was about unifying that customer journey that just took way, way, way too long. I will say, actually, now that I think about it at Calendly, the one thing that I always wish we could do more of and faster is good data. And it took us a really long time to clean up our data. We had to overhaul our analytics team. We just didn't have the right people. And so we were operating without data for a really, really long time. And when we finally got the right reporting in and the right data in, it really transformed how we sold and how we marketed. And so I always encourage everybody, day one, have amazing operations, amazing analytics, because you can't actually do anything without that.
Yeah. What did that look like in kind of the real world at Calendly? Like what, I think a lot of people probably listening to this podcast are like, ooh, I know our data isn't where it's supposed to be. And it can feel like this overwhelming, daunting overhaul. What are some like small steps, small wins that people can do to try and get their data and operations and analytics, back on the right track?
Yeah. I mean, data is the most excruciating thing, and it's the least sexy thing, but it's the most important thing. And what happens in PLG SLG is that two completely different data streams pop up, because you've got the PLG world and you've got, usually an iterable, like, some kind of marketing database. You've got a charge beat, like you have like a bunch of databases where your PLG data lives. And then you've got Salesforce, you've got your like all these other data sources where your SLG lives, and they don't talk to each other. And so that's, and then what also happens is that you've got your RevOps folks that, this is super in the weeds, but I spent like 6 months of my life talking about this at Calendly. You have all of these like data labels and data tags that people are creating in a vacuum. And our problem for months and months and months was that we had a bunch of analysts that were just pulling completely wrong data because they didn't know what this data meant. Everybody was just creating these in a vacuum. Nobody was talking to each other. The data engineers and the analysts and the RevOps folks were all just building completely different databases, and there was just no control. And so literally all the reports we were looking at was people just pulling bad data. And it's just finally when we brought in this incredible analytics leader, if she's listening, hello. And she just like forced everybody to talk to each other to build a common source of data. And then we were finally pulling in the right reports. We were finally able to look at good data.
Hmm. Yeah, that making sure that you have a unified, shared, collective like source of truth is so critical. Would as you were making these big kind of overhauls, um, did you have any kind of leadership meetings that would be focused on this? Like, what were kind of some of the tactics involved in the
Yeah.
data overhaul?
One of the best things we did at Calendly was we created these ad hoc committees. And I think that that's really important is ownership. You can't just assume that you can get people from 10 different parts of the company to come together and to figure things out. So we created an operating committee and a governing committee. And so the operating committee would have, one representative, like a typically a director or a VP level representative from every part of the company that needed to be there. And then we'd have one person in charge of the operating committee. And they would be the one that convenes them every week, make sure that they have, the agenda, make sure that things are moving. And then our C-suite would be the governing committee, and they would meet with us every 2 weeks. And it would be their job to report to us on the progress, and we would unblock things and we would make decisions. And ended up doing that for 4 to 5 major issues that we had across the company. And I'd say that that was a very successful process that I definitely plan to take with me in the future. It just created a lot of accountability and visibility, and it kept things moving. Where oftentimes when you say, "Oh, there's issues, go solve it," there's no clear leader, there's no accountability, there's no urgency. And we really wanted to create urgency.
Yeah, I like that framework a lot. And yeah, I think if you've been part of any organization who's had data struggles, it's always the thing that gets pushed if there's no one actually owning it. You're like, yes, we know we have to figure out all of this stuff, but at the end of the day, I have to hit my number. I have to hit my,
Mhm.
lead opportunity goal, my revenue, my pipeline, and we'll deal with that later. So I love this idea of these committees. So if people want to steal that, it was you have this operating committee, you have a VP from all these different, business units. And then they would basically kind of come up with solutions and then pitch that to the governing committee. Is that how it worked?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
They would, I mean, they're obviously much smarter about these things than I am. I mean, I could never create a solution for a data issue. My life depended on it. But certainly my head of analytics could, and our head of data engineering could. And so their job was to come up with the solutions, but obviously there will always be trade-offs. And so, our job was to kind of say, okay, given these constraints, these are 2 to 3 options. Which one is the most palatable? Which one do we want to go forward? So really our job was to make the decision. Also, the reality is it's not everybody, is, if there were blockers, if there were priorities, that was the really big thing, right? So if they knew that they needed to get 2 weeks of data engineering time in order to have a fix, but the data engineering team said, hey, we have all these other priorities we have to work on. Our job was to say, well, that's okay if you don't work on those priorities, or we would help them just figure out how to prioritize, how to unblock, how to get more resources when they just couldn't make that decision. They were not empowered. They weren't able to.
Yeah. Yeah. And was there any incentive structures for these operating committees, or does it kind of go back to, hey, it's entrepreneurial mindset. This is something that is going to help the business. You should, devote time and energy to it.
We are all owners of this company. Their job is to make this company successful.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So we did a prep call before this, and one thing that you said has been rattling around my head since we had that prep call, because I think it's really interesting and I want to talk a little bit about it. And you mentioned this idea of creative destruction in marketing. And I would love for you to kind of explain the thinking and idea behind leveraging creative destruction to to grow and make sure that you have fresh new ideas constantly?
Absolutely. So I think it goes back to me being an entrepreneur and wanting to cultivate that mindset. I just believe that there are so many changes and there are so many new ideas and there's so many things that we just don't know. And I have always wanted to encourage my team to be thinking differently, to be innovative, to create something new, to have absolutely no fear about trying new things. Because just because something works now or doesn't work now doesn't mean that it will be the same a quarter from now or 2 quarters from now. The world is changing so insanely fast. And it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a marketer, an engineer, a salesperson, you have to change with that. And so everything that I did with my team was encourage them to change almost everything that they did every quarter. So we would have very high level goals for the year. We'd have clear OKRs. We'd have, a very clear path forward of what our strategy was and what we're going after. But every quarter, we would look at all of these sets of activities and tactics, campaigns, channels that we were doing, and we'd have to change most of them. And whether that was really major, like testing an entire new ad channel, whether that was minor, like instead of doing 1 hour webinar formats, try a 5-minute webinar format. It didn't matter. I just wanted everybody to be looking at everything they were doing and be willing to throw most of it out and try something new.
Mhm. I love this idea. And, particularly there's a lot of driving forces behind it, but obviously with the AI revolution we're in right now, like literally every week there's like a new big announcement that I'm like, oh my God, this is going to fundamentally change everything. And so if
Yeah.
you've built a plan that was pre whatever new innovation just came out, like it needs to be revisited. Would it be fair to say that, your job as a leader was like, okay, we set the OKRs, the strategy remains constant, but the tactics are always evolving. Like how we get there is going to change every quarter, every month.
Yeah, and there's a really big difference between cultivating experimentation and creating chaos. So
Right.
my job was to ensure that everybody felt extremely clear on our goals, our company goals, and how our marketing goals and sales goals ladder up to the company goals. So, for example, a year-long company goal would be move up market. Very clear. We need to hit 50,000 enterprise financial services customers this year. Drive, I'm just making this up, drive $100 million in financial services pipeline. Extremely clear what people need to do. You can't every month be like, just kidding, we're not going after enterprise customers now. We're going after SMB, retail customers. So that's chaos. Can't do that. So you have to have a very clear idea of the customer, that segment, the goals, but then all the stuff that people have to do to get there, that's their job. That's not my job. So I would never tell people, I want you to try this set of emails, this set of tactics, go after the ad campaigns in this way. Like that's not my job. My job was to help them understand from a budget perspective what is available, to provide the resources that they need to help prioritize and allocate budget appropriately. And then their job is to figure out every single month, every quarter, what are the new things that they're going to try, and then how they're going to report back to me about what worked and what didn't work.
Hmm. Hmm. How did you go about fostering the culture of experimentation? I think there's a trap as companies scale, get bigger. Sometimes the type of talent that is maybe attracted to a larger organization is maybe a little more risk averse, and it's easier just like, hey, let's do the thing that we've always done, because then there's no one to blame if it goes wrong, versus
Yeah.
constantly having that startup mentality. It's like, no, our job is to be scientists on the marketing team or the sales team, to like always be running experiments and tests so we can optimize and get better over time.
Yeah. So I would say there's two things that I did that extremely deliberately cultivated an environment of kind of trust and comfort. So number one is I tried very hard to be very, very approachable. And I know that sounds silly, but I have very rarely worked for a marketing leader or any kind of leader that was actually very approachable. And so I do a lot of very deliberate things. So I talk about my family all the time in meetings. I share pictures of my family. I talk about my weekends. For me, it's always about baseball and soccer. And I talk a lot about my own personal times when I have failed. I talk about my vulnerabilities. So I spend a lot of time building trust with my team so that they know me as a person, not just as this random person 3 levels above them that they're scared to talk to. I did, even though I had a very large team, I did skip levels with everybody, in either individual settings or group settings. I had a very open door policy on my calendar. I just tried as much as I possibly could to be a human being and show them that, they don't have to be scared of me. So that's number one. And I can tell you, having worked in many companies, that I was terrified when I had to go and speak in front of somebody 2 to 3 levels above me. And that is never how I wanted to create. That was not the culture I wanted to create. So that's number one. The second is that in public meetings, like in our all hands, even in my board deck, in other updates to my C-level peers, I would talk constantly about the mistakes that we made. I would say, hey, we tried this campaign. It didn't work. This is the reason why. This is what we're going to do differently. And I would share that with my team. And it would be very clear that there was no blame. And it was just very factual. Like, not everything is going to work. Clearly, if everything works, it means you are absolutely not trying hard enough. And so when people saw that I was very matter of fact about what worked and what didn't work, it just didn't make it worrisome anymore. They weren't nervous about it anymore. And so people could come to me and say, like, hey, they tried this thing, it didn't work. And sometimes people would really screw up, right? Sometimes we would send an email out to 100,000 people with, dear XX, dear first name. And that happens. And it's happened at every company I've been at. And you just say, well, what did we learn from it? And let's not do it again. What are you going to do? People try, people care. I know that they care. And if people make mistakes, they make mistakes. If people screw up, if people run a bad campaign, if people waste money, as long as they're learning something, as long as they're trying.
Yeah. I think that's a mark of a great leader, is this open door policy, talking openly about your mistakes. I think I've certainly worked for a lot of leaders that try and hide mistakes or skip over them. And then you're just robbing your team of the lessons that are associated with those mistakes, which is so big.
I will tell you one story that for me was so powerful. So when I was at Asana, it was when I just joined, and I joined during COVID. So I hadn't really met anybody else in the team. Everybody else had been there before. I was the only one that had it. And my team had been working for months on this huge launch. And it was the first launch that I and my team had done. And it was the first time we were doing the launch, and it was the first time I had met the rest of the marketing team in person. So it was all of my marketing peers and our CMO, Dave, who, is my boss. And everything that could go wrong in this launch went wrong. And it was with our CEO and our CRO. I mean, it just could not have been worse. And I'm sitting in this room and I'm so embarrassed because this is the first time that my work had been shown. And we're all sitting there watching the feed freeze, and it was so bad. And then all of my peers started talking about all of the terrible things that had happened to them, all the demos that went wrong, all of the launches that went wrong. And it was amazing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is a group of people that care. And this is a group of people that are not going to hold this against me, that we tried something different and new and we screwed up. And that just completely changed my whole relationship with all of them. And it made me really comfortable that I could try something and make mistakes and I wasn't going to get punished for it. So it stuck so strongly in my head because it gave me that freedom to be able to experiment and know that they have my back.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like some trauma bonding happens when things don't go the right way. You actually get closer as a team if you're able to
Yes.
be open and discuss them, freely without fear, and there's trust built in. Well, I'm sorry that happened, but thank you for sharing that publicly, because it is important.
Oh my God. To this
Yeah.
day, I will never, it was the worst. It was the worst thing that's ever happened to me professionally. I'll never forget
Oh,
it.
the worst. Going back to one of the things you said with the high first name, I remember we did that at Outreach, and Outreach was literally the sales engagement platform that's like never that's the problem we solve, or one of them, so it happens to everyone. I like it. Okay, I want to go quickly to a founder question. This one's super interesting. We just did an episode on how to look for and identify what makes a great first sales hire. And this is kind of the same thing, except your first marketer. So this is an early stage founder who sent in this question. So if you're a founder, let's say you're, pre-seed, seed stage, and you're like, all right, it's time to invest in marketing. What do you look for in that first hire?
Yeah, so I do a lot of advising and consulting, and this is the number one question that I get. It's a great question. So I would say, well, if you ask 100 marketers, you get 100 answers, but this is my answer. I'd say number one, I would suggest not hiring a marketer until you have product market fit. Because no matter what you do from a marketing perspective, you can't market your way into product market fit. And you're going to be spending a huge amount of money and wasted money until you figure out your ICP, until you figure out the right product for the right person, and that is a founder's job. It's not a marketer's job. And so as a founder, when you figure that out, then you can scale it. Don't try to scale it until you figure that out. So that's, in my opinion, I would wait. So once you have product market fit, once you're thinking about a marketer, what's really important to understand is marketing is totally different than all the other functions. So marketing is extremely varied. There are 5 to 6 different functions in marketing. They're all completely different from each other. And there's not a single marketer on the planet that is an expert in all of them. Also, marketing at 0 to 1 is very different than 1 to 10, very different than 10 to 100. So you're not going to be able to find a marketer that can do all of those things. It's just totally different tactics. When I often tell my clients that when you're looking for a marketer, look for someone that's going to be with you for 2 years. If you get someone for more than 2 years, consider that a bonus. But think about what you need for the next 2 years. Don't worry about scaling. Don't worry about worry about the next 2 years. Then when you have that, then think about what are your most pressing issues. Typically, you're going to have one of 2 pressing issues. One is you feel like you've got a really good handle on your message and your narrative. And really what you need to do is build pipeline. And then you're going to look for someone that has expertise in demand gen. The other pressing issue you might have is actually your pipeline looks pretty good. Your user generation looks pretty good, but you don't really have a good handle on your narrative and your differentiation. So then you're going to look for someone with product marketing experience. So that's kind of how I would look at it, which is what's your most pressing need? Find someone with that experience, because you're not going to be able to find somebody that has all the different experiences that you need. And just recognize what you are giving up to get that expertise and be okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I think that's a great way of looking at it. And I like this idea of just looking for someone for the next 2 years. I think it feels like such a monumental hire, like, oh, the first sales hire, first marketing hire. And you're like, oh, I want this person to be our VP one day, and they're going to grow and they're going to be with us for this whole time. And in reality, jobs require different skill sets as you scale, and so I think that's
and
a
don't
good way
consider
to
it a
look at it.
failure. Yeah, don't consider it
Yeah.
a failure if they only make it a year and a half. If they provided value, which hopefully they will, it's totally fine. And like, you're just going to need somebody for that next step. And that next step, getting from what you need at 5 million is definitely different than 25 million. It's definitely different 50 at 100, 500, and that's totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Building on this question a little bit is, I would love to hear your take on when folks should start investing in brand. I think that's become more and more important. Even some of the startups we see now out there, even quite early stage, you've heard of them and they have great brands. Is it ever too early to invest in brand? Because it can be quite a expensive endeavor. But looking at Asana, Calendly, those brands are household names.
Mhm.
When do you think startups should start investing in brand?
I think there is a big misnomer that investing in your brand means billboards and TV campaigns. Asana and Calendly had years and years and years and years before they spent a dime on marketing. And Calendly was a household name before it spent any money on marketing, before it had a marketing team. So I think your brand is really a reflection on all of the elements that make your company known and valuable to customers. And so investing in your brand could also mean just having an amazing product, having a super viral product, having great customer support, having great communities, having people that love you and talk about you, having great reviews. Those are all things that you can do to build your brand without spending any money or very little money. And so I would say from day one, you should invest in your brand in those ways, in building a company that people love and want to support and want to share and talk about. And then typically what people think about more traditional brand spend, it's often in relation to something else, some external force. So maybe competitors have come in. Maybe you feel like you are on the precipice of something really big, like, okay, there's a market shift and we think that we can really gain a lot of market share and we have to really go in heavily. Oftentimes it's a repositioning of the company. It's launching a big new product. You have to reach new people. That's how I would typically think about when it might make sense to do a big brand campaign, is when you're ready to accelerate or transform the way that people think about your company.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. Almost like investing in brand is really just investing the right dollars into product and your customer and making them successful. And then they become, your brand advocates. It's not all about just big flashy PR campaigns or, investing in
Yeah.
a Super Bowl commercial. It's kind of what is said behind closed doors.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen an advertisement, seen an article about a company. I've been intrigued, and then I go and I look at their reviews, and they're terrible, and I don't buy it. Right? So everything has to be about the product first before spending money on the marketing. If your reviews are not good, people are not going to buy your product. If your word of mouth is not good, people are not going to buy it. So focus on that.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I have two final questions for you, and I appreciate you hanging out with me today. The first question, I call it the silver bullet question. I say it almost every episode, but most of us know there are no silver bullets. Unfortunately, I really wish there were, but people look for them anyway. What is one tactic or strategy that's working for you or the companies that you're serving today?
Yeah, I mean, we're moving all of our budget from PR, a lot from Google, to social. It is astonishing over the past couple of years how much value you can get out of both organic and paid social, particularly micro influencers. And so these are, even for B2B companies, influencers on TikTok, on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, a ridiculous amount of value from Reddit. And there's actually even Reddit SEO experts. So I would say that if you are just starting out, really focus on your social influencer strategy. It's going to really significantly pay dividends.
Yeah, it's a great call out, and I think we saw Clay run this playbook pretty well. I know they were out there engaging all these different social influencers within kind of the sales and GTM realm. It's funny you bring up Reddit.
Everywhere.
I keep hearing about Reddit from so many people, just recently, within I think the last 2-3 months. Any learnings you can share from Reddit, the platform? I've never been a part of a marketing team or anyone that's invested in that channel. So I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I mean, the reason, at least in my opinion, the reason that it's become so much more valuable is that if you Google a company or if you Google a concept, Reddit appears among the top results. So it has just shot up in terms of the importance. So not only is Reddit itself has a massive user base and tons of engagement, but when you're searching for something on Google, instead of it showing, a company's results or other review sites, it's showing Reddit. So it's almost becoming a de facto review site. And there's just a lot of very impassioned people on Reddit. And
It's a nice
they
way of
go
putting it.
into, yes, try to be diplomatic. But they also, they go into a lot of detail. So there's a lot of depth around it. And so it's almost like they're getting a review and a series of reviews, and there's multiple different angles. And so I think it's just a place that people feel like they're going to get an unbiased review of, an industry products. But you can feed and you can source, you can sort of infuse certain topics and certain subreddits with yourself, having other people, asking your customers to chime in. So there are just lots. It really is like SEO, but specifically for Reddit. So I would say that and also being really responsive when you see people with a negative review, jumping in and really trying to be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think you've inspired me to go deep on Reddit marketing. So that's going to be my homework for the next little while, because it's so
Well,
interesting,
enjoy that
right? It's
rabbit
also
hole.
the anonymous component to it is very interesting, because you can have almost like sub brands that might be kind of part of your brand that are like engaging the community, and it doesn't seem as biased, I guess, if you were just to like respond as Calendly or Asana, which I think is cool. All right, final question is, what is one widely held belief that CMOs, CROs still believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
So I'm very surprised that I still interact with C-level folks who think that there is a very clean customer journey, and that it is like an assembly line where you start with marketing and marketing drives leads, and then they kind of throw it over the fence to sales, and sales closes it, and they throw it over the fence in customer support, and then poor customer support is the one dealing with all of the existing customers, and then their job is to do all the retention, and it's nobody else's job at that point. I just can't. That is not something that I have actually seen over many, many years be how customers think and how we should all interact. So in my opinion, like, we are all, as a company, everybody is responsible for the customer. And it is a twisty, tangly, super interwoven, messy customer journey that requires everybody to think about how do you acquire customers, how do you sell to them, and how do you retain them. And to me, worrying about attribution, worrying about credit is very, very silly. And ultimately, it's about how does everybody collectively hit the number. And if that means that marketing stops driving leads because they need to focus on retention and upsell, then let's do that. If that means customer support has to be selling upfront to customers, like, let's do that. But again, going back to being an entrepreneur and that entrepreneurial spirit, it's everybody's role to think about the customer from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great call out. And I will tell you, when I was an operator, attribution was the bane of my existence. I just always wanted to do the thing and not like look back too much and be like, who gets credit for the thing? So much wasted time and energy can be like, sometimes it's up to like 30% of people's job is just proving what they're doing is having an impact, which I think is just incredible waste of resources. But it's always a balance, right? How did you, because you need attribution for knowing what's working, what to double down on. What was
Yes.
that kind of balance for you of like, hey, we all have shared goals, we're driving towards them. We need at least enough data so we can make informed decisions, but we don't want to slow people down with this attribution mess. How did you think about it?
Yeah. So what I would do is I would always, I think number one thing is building trust between marketing and sales and customer support. So if you all trust each other and value each other and recognize that you're all doing the right thing, have shared goals, have shared like an understanding of what's working or not, then attribution doesn't really matter because you all agree that these are the things that you're going to do. Where I find other problems is when marketing, which is like 99% of the time, creates all of their campaigns in a silo and then just throws them over the fence in sales and then complains when sales doesn't, follow up on leads or whatever. And then sales is complaining that marketing doesn't listen to them. Then of course everything breaks down and there's no trust. And then you start fighting about attribution. But if you all like believe the same things and if you all agreed on the plan together, then if you don't hit your numbers, it's because all of you made the wrong call. And it doesn't matter whether, marketing isn't delivering or sales and following up the leads, you all are in it together. And so I think fundamentally that's absolutely number one, which is you build a shared plan. The sales team has 100% input into all the campaigns that you're going to run, all the things that you're going to do, all of your goals. They see your numbers. It's super transparent. You've all agreed on the assumptions. And then you just build the plan together and you operate the plan together. And when I look at data, I am, as you said, I'm not looking at attribution. I couldn't care less whether marketing drives 50% and sales drives 50%. Who cares? Especially in this world where so much of it is about a customer hitting you up 10 times, 15 times. They're doing so much before they're willing to contact sales. Also in this world where expansion is as important as the initial sale, then marketing never gets credit for that. And who cares? But if you're doing all the right things and that's what your data should show you, are the campaigns that you're running, are they influencing? Are people engaging with them? Are they interacting with them? Are people coming to your webinars? Are people clicking on ads? Are the right people seeing them? If you run an ABM campaign, are those customers eventually reaching out and upselling? Those are the things that matter. And you can look and say, yeah, what we're doing is valuable because we are touching customers in some way that's eventually causing them to buy from us. That's the only thing that matters.
Totally. I love that way of thinking. Do you think it was easier for you to think that way since you had the CMO and CRO title? You could kind of see the whole picture, and I imagine that drove alignment from the very top down.
Yeah, but even before, even when we had a CRO before I took over, we had that mentality. And I was very fortunate that she was someone that was interested in building that kind of relationship, that understood that was really important. And I think that's, and I think having that strong relationship with CRO, having the strong relationship with the CFO and the CEO, having that buy-in across the organization. And a lot of that just took a lot of communication around our plan, getting a lot of buy-in. I just see so many CMOs who are very defensive and very closed off and who take everything so personally and who don't want any kind of input. And they just want their goal. They just want I want to be able to drive 40% of leads and that's it. And that's my goal. That's not going to make you successful. And so just being really open and focused on what's best for the company, I think will serve you well. And building that bridge with the CRO is going to be really critical for you.
Yeah. I like it. Well, I think that is a great place to end. Jessica, thank you again for the conversation. If listeners want to follow along with what you're doing, are you an X person, LinkedIn person? What's the best way to follow Jessica?
Definitely not an X person, so LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you. And to all our listeners, appreciate you hanging out with us. I say it every week, but listening's one thing, executing something totally different. Hopefully you take some of these ideas, strategies, and tactics and implement them in your own business. And we will see you all next week.